The footage was 47 seconds. Marcus Webb watched it 3 times. The first time, a receptionist. The supply room. The petty cash box on the second shelf. Hand in, hand out, 3 times in 3 weeks, $340 total. He picked up the phone and called the police. The second time, he noted her name on the badge. Camille Brooks. 3 years with the company, perfect attendance. The kind of employee who generated no paperwork because she never gave anyone a reason to write anything down. He gave the dispatcher her name. The third time, he didn't know why he watched it a third time. The facts hadn't changed. The call was made. The decision was made. He watched it anyway. And the third time, he stopped looking at what she took. He looked at how she put it in her pocket. Slowly. Carefully. The way you handle something that has to be enough because you have already exhausted every other option, and this is what remains, and you know in the body that you are going to have to live with what you are doing right now for the rest of your life. He knew that motion. He had seen it once before. He was 9 years old, West Baltimore, a grocery store on North Avenue, his grandmother's coat pocket. The police were 11 minutes away. He picked up the phone, not to wait, to call them back. Camille Brooks had not planned to steal anything. That was the truth, and it mattered. Not as a defense, not as the first line of an explanation she preparing for someone, but as a fact she returned to every night when Noah was asleep and the apartment was quiet, and she sat at the kitchen table with the hospital paperwork in front of her and tried to find the version of the math that didn't end where it kept ending. There wasn't one. She had found that out over 19 days. 19 days since the diagnosis. 19 days of running the numbers in every direction available. Her savings account, her checking account, the credit card with $2,200 left on the limit, the second credit card with $400, the small emergency fund she had built over 3 years of putting away $50 a month that had seemed, when she was building it, like it would be enough for an emergency. It was not enough for this emergency. Noah had been diagnosed on a Tuesday, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The pediatric oncologist had said it with the specific, careful directness of someone who had delivered this sentence many times and had learned that the kindest version of it was the clear one, not softened, not surrounded by qualifications. Just said, followed immediately but traced by. The good news is this is the most treatable form of childhood leukemia. The survival rate with proper treatment is over 90%. Camille had held on to that number. 90%. She had written it at the top of every page of notes she took in that office, the way you write something you need to be able to see when the rest of the page gets difficult. The rest of the page had gotten very difficult. Treatment protocol, 28 months. Multiple phases. The first phase, induction, required medications that her insurance covered at 80% after the deductible. The deductible was $2,500. She had met $847 of it through the year's regular medical expenses. She needed $1,653 more before the 80% coverage kicked in. The first medication payment was due in 10 days. $2,200. She had $340 in her checking account and $2,200 on one credit card and $400 on the other, and an emergency fund of $1,847 that she had already mentally spent on the months ahead when the deductible was met and the 20% copays started accumulating, and she needed something to cover them. She had called the hospital's financial assistance office. Hold time 47 minutes. The assistance coordinator had been kind and specific. There were programs, there were options. The application process took 6 to 8 weeks for review. The medication was due in 10 days. She had called the insurance company. Hold time, 23 minutes. The representative had explained the deductible structure, clearly and without apology. The way you explain a rule that exists and is not your rule, and that you are not empowered to change. She had asked about hardship exceptions. There were none. She had asked about payment plans for the deductible. There were none. She had asked what happened if the medication wasn't started on schedule. The representative had paused and then said, carefully, that was a question for her doctor. She had called 3 family members. Her mother, $200 immediately, with the specific pained generosity of someone giving what they had and knowing it wasn't enough. Her sister in Atlanta, $150, same generosity, same insufficiency. Her cousin Marcus, not Marcus Webb, a different Marcus, Her cousin in Philadelphia had not answered and had not called back. $200, 150, 340s in her account, 690. She needed 200. The gap was $500. She had stared at that number for 11 days. On the 12th day, she had been restocking the supply room at Webb Capital when she noticed that the petty cash box on the second shelf was not locked. It was never locked. She had restocked that room dozens of times, and the box had always been there and always been unlocked. The specific casual negligence of an office that operated on trust and had never had reason not to. She had stood in that supply room for 4 minutes. She knew because she checked her watch when she went in and again when she came out. 4 minutes. She had not touched the box that day. She had gone back to her desk and called the financial assistance office again and waited on hold for 31 minutes and been told the application was still processing and that expedited review was not available for her situation. She had gone home and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the number, $510. She had gone back to the supply room the next morning. She took $120. She counted it twice before she put it in her pocket, the way you count something when you need to be precise, when the amount matter. And you cannot take more than you need, because taking more than you need is a different thing entirely from what you are doing. She did not think of it as stealing. She thought of it as borrowing from the only source that would give it to her without an application and a 6 to 8 week review period and a hold time of 47 minutes. She thought of it as the thing she was going to spend the rest of her life paying back in whatever form payment was available, because she understood completely what she was doing and had decided in 4 minutes in a supply room on a Wednesday morning that she was going to do it anyway. Noah did not know. He was 7 years old and he was sick, and he was in the specific luminous way of children who had not yet learned to be afraid of their own illness, almost entirely himself, still drawing, still asking questions about everything, still wearing the vomte he had made for her at school in the specific proud way of a child who wanted to see his work on the person he had made it for. Blue and yellow beads, her favorite colors. He had remembered. She wore it every day. She was wearing it the morning she took the third installment, $110, the last of what she needed, and turned to leave the supply room and looked for the first time directly at the camera on the wall above the door. She had known the camera was there. She had known it the first time and the second time, and this time she had taken the money anyway, because the alternative was Noah not starting treatment on schedule, and the oncologist had been clear about what delays in the induction phase could mean for the 90%. And she had decided, somewhere between the first phone call and the 47-minute hold time, and the $510 gap and the 4 minutes in the supply room, that she was willing to accept whatever came from the camera. She was not willing to accept what came from the alternative. She went back to her desk. She answered the phones. She did her job with the same precision and reliability that had produced 3 years of positive performance reviews and perfect attendance, because the job was the job, and the thing she had done in the supply room was a different thing, and she was capable of holding both of them simultaneously without one contaminating the other. She was good at holding things simultaneously. Single mothers generally were. At 2:47 p.m., she got a call from Marcus Webb's assistant asking if she could come to his office at 3. She looked at her desk, at Noah's photograph, at the vomte on her wrist, at the performance review from last year that said, "Camille is an exemplary employee whose reliability and professionalism set a standard for the team." She straightened her jacket. She went upstairs. Marcus Webb had not thought about his grandmother in a professional context before today. That was not entirely accurate. He thought about her often in the specific background way of someone who carried a person with them without always knowing they were carrying them. In the decisions he made about who to hire and how to pay them and what the company's medical coverage looked like, and the dozen other places where Cecilia Webb's life intersected with the choices he made from a desk on the 14th floor of a Baltimore office building 4 miles from the house where she had raised him. But he had never watched security footage and seen her until today. Cecilia Webb had been born in 1931 in a Baltimore that did not require much explanation to people who understood what Baltimore in 1931 meant for a black woman. What was available, what wasn't, which doors opened and which stayed closed, regardless of what you brought to them. She had married at 19 and been widowed at 34 and had raised 4 children on a combination of domestic work and the specific, relentless ingenuity of someone who understood that the difference between her children eating and not eating was a problem she was going to solve, regardless of what the available resources said about whether it was solvable. She had solved it every day for 40 years. Marcus's mother, Cecilia's youngest daughter, had died of ovarian cancer in 1976 when Marcus was 9 and his brother David was 11. The diagnosis had come in March. She was gone by October. 7 months, the specific, brutal efficiency of a cancer that had been present longer than anyone knew, because the kind of medical attention that catches things early had not been reliably available to a woman in her circumstances in Baltimore in the mid-1970s. Marcus remembered the hospital. Not the medical details. He had been 9. The medical details had been managed above his comprehension. He remembered the smell of it. The specific, institutional smell of a place that was doing its best with limited resources, that was overwhelmed and understaffed, and that had treated his mother with genuine care, and had not been able to save her anyway. He remembered his father's face at the funeral. He remembered not understanding at 9 that the specific expression on his father's face was not only grief, it was also the particular, grinding weight of a man who had just lost his wife, and who now had 2 sons and no income sufficient to raise them, and who understood, in the way adults understood things that children were protected from, that grief was a luxury he could not afford to have, fully because survival required the part of his mind that grief was trying to occupy. His father had done his best. His best had not been enough. Marcus and David had gone to live with Cecilia at 12 and 14, when it became clear that their father's best and the reality of 2 growing boys were not compatible on a single income in West Baltimore. Cecilia's house on Mosher Street was small. 3 bedrooms. She gave the boys one and kept the other, and used the third for the domestic sewing work she took in to supplement the cleaning jobs. The kitchen was the center of the house. Not metaphorically, literally, the room where everything happened, where homework was done and problems were discussed, and the specific, daily mathematics of feeding a household on what was available was worked out with the precision of someone who had been doing it for decades and had no margin for error. She was a remarkable cook, not in the way that gets described in food writing, not with unusual ingredients or innovative techniques, in the way that matters more. She could make what she had taste like more than it was. She understood flavor and texture and the specific alchemy of combining inexpensive ingredients in ways that produced something that felt abundant even when the ingredients themselves were not. Marcus had learned, growing up in that kitchen, that abundance was not a quantity. It was a practice. He had carried that forward into the company, into the way he thought about resources and people, and what it meant to build something that actually worked for the people inside it, into the health insurance policy he had redesigned in 2019 when his HR director had presented the renewal options and he had looked at the deductible structure and thought about his mother and had said, "We can do better than this." They had done better. Not well enough, apparently. He was sitting with that understanding when his assistant knocked. "Ms. Brooks is here," she said. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. He looked at the screen, the footage still open. 47 seconds. He had watched it 3 times, and the third time he had seen what he had seen and had called Detective Kim and asked her to stand by and had not yet told her why. He thought about 1987, his grandmother at the grocery store on North Avenue. He had been 9. No, he had been 12 by then. They were living with her. David was 14. A Tuesday afternoon in November. He had gone with her because she went every Tuesday, and he liked going, like the specific, purposeful way she moved through the store, with her list and her coupons and her running calculation of what each item cost and what the total would be and whether the total was what she had available. That Tuesday, the total was not what she had available. He had not understood this until the register. had not understood it from her face or her manner. She had moved through the store the same as always, precise and deliberate, nothing in her expression suggesting that this Tuesday was different from any other Tuesday. At the register, the total had been $43.17. She had $38 in her wallet. He had watched her look at the total, then she had asked the cashier to remove two items, the chicken thighs and the block of cheese. And the total had come down to $36.84. And she had paid it, and they had walked out, and she had not said anything, and he had not said anything, and they had walked home in the November cold with two fewer things than they had put in the cart. He had been 12. He had understood, walking home, that the chicken thighs and the cheese had not been removed because she didn't want them. 3 weeks later, he had gone with her again. He had watched more carefully that time, and he had seen what he had seen on the footage today. The same motion, the same deliberateness, the same quality of someone doing something they had decided was the only remaining option, and were doing it with the full, clear-eyed knowledge of what they were doing. The difference was that in 1987, the store owner had seen it too. He had called the police. Cecilia Webb had been handcuffed in the parking lot of a grocery store on North Avenue in November 1987 in front of her 12-year-old grandson for taking $4.33 worth of food. Marcus had stood on that parking lot and watched. He had not understood everything he was watching. He had understood enough. The charge had been dropped. First offense, no prior record. A public defender who had argued successfully for dismissal. She had come home the same night. She had made dinner. She had not talked about it, and he had known, at 12, that not talking about it was what she needed, and that what he needed was irrelevant in comparison. He had never told anyone that story. Not David. Not the journalists who had written about his success and his origins and the West Baltimore childhood that had produced a $1 billion portfolio. Not the business school students he occasionally spoke to about resilience and the long game and the things you carry from where you come from. He had carried it alone. For 44 years, he looked at the screen, Camille Brooks, 47 seconds, $340. 3 times. He thought about $4.33 worth of food in a November parking lot. He thought about the distance between those two numbers and what that distance did and didn't mean. He picked up the phone and called Detective Kim. "Sarah," he said, "I need to stand down the call." A pause. "Marcus." "I know. I'll explain, not now." He paused. "I need an hour." He hung up. He looked at the door. 5 minutes were up. Camille Brooks was waiting. He stood up. She sat across from him with the specific, contained composure of someone who had decided, somewhere between the elevator and this chair, exactly how they were going to be in this room. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Present. He noticed that immediately. He had been in enough difficult conversations, terminations, disputes, the particular tension of a room where one person had information the other didn't, to read the body language of someone preparing to perform a version of themselves. Camille Brooks was not performing anything. She sat in the chair across from his desk with her hands in her lap and her eyes on him, and the specific, quiet steadiness of someone who had already had the hard conversation with herself and was now simply waiting to have it with him. The vomité on her wrist caught the light. Blue and yellow beads. He noted it without knowing yet what it meant. "Mrs. Brooks," he said. "Mr. Webb," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned the monitor on his desk to face her. The footage. 47 seconds. He let it play without commentary. The supply room. The second shelf. Her hand going in and coming out. And watched her face while it played. She watched it the way you watch something you have already memorized. Without surprise. Without the performance of shock that people produced when they were caught doing something and wanted to create the impression that being caught was the surprising part. She watched it with the flat, clear attention of someone watching evidence of a decision they made and were not going to pretend they hadn't made. When it ended, she looked at him. "How many times have you watched it?" she said. "3, he said. She nodded slightly, as though 3 was the right number, as though she had expected 3. "What did you see the third time?" she said. He looked at her. The question was direct in a way he hadn't anticipated. Not deflecting, not explaining, not doing any of the things people did in this chair when they understood what the conversation was about. She had asked him what he saw. as though his seeing mattered as much as what was on the screen. "How you put it in your pocket," he said. She held his gaze. "The police," she said. "I called them," he said. "I called them back." Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated than relief. The expression of someone receiving information that changes the immediate parameters of their situation without changing the underlying reality of why, she said. He looked at the monitor. At the frozen final frame of the footage, Camille turning to leave the supply room, her hand at her side, the specific quality of her posture that he had watched 3 times and that had produced, on the third viewing, the thing he had seen. "I need to ask you something first," he said, "and I need you to answer it honestly. Not for my benefit, for yours, because the answer determines what this conversation is." She waited. "The $340, he said. "What was it for?" The room was very quiet. Outside, Baltimore was doing its afternoon, the specific, continuous noise of a city that did not pause for the conversations happening inside its buildings. He could hear it faintly through the glass. Traffic. A siren somewhere north, the ordinary percussion of a Tuesday. Camille looked at her hands, at the vomte. Then she looked, "Son," she said. "Noah. He's 7. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without performance. "He was diagnosed with leukemia 19 days ago. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, highly treatable, 90% survival rate with proper treatment." She paused. "The first medication payment was due in 10 days. $200. My insurance deductible is $2,000. I had met $847 of it." She looked at him steadily. "The gap was $510 after I exhausted every other option. I needed the treatment to start on schedule. Delays in the induction phase affect outcomes." Another pause. "I took $340 over 3 visits. I have $170 remaining to find." Marcus said nothing. She was not finished. "I called the hospital financial assistance office," she said. "Twice. 6 to 8 week review. I called the insurance company. No hardship exceptions, no payment plans for the deductible." She looked at her hands again. "I called family. I got $350. I have 3 years of good performance reviews and perfect attendance, and a health insurance policy through this company that has a deductible I cannot meet in the timeline my son's treatment requires." She looked up. "I made a decision. I understood what the decision was. I am not going to pretend I didn't make it." The room was quiet for a long moment. Marcus looked at the monitor. At the footage he had watched 3 times. The first time, facts. The second time, details. The third time, the thing the camera had not been designed to capture. The specific, deliberate care of a person doing the only thing left to do. "The vomte," he said. She looked at her wrist. Something shifted in her face. The first crack in the composure. Small, immediately controlled. "Noah made it. At school. Blue and yellow, my favorite colors." She paused. "He doesn't know what's happening, not the full version. He knows he's sick and that the doctors are helping." She looked at him. "He made it before the diagnosis. He just wanted me to have something he made." Marcus looked at the vomte. Blue and yellow beads on a thin elastic cord. The specific, imprecise craftsmanship of a 7-year-old who had made something for his mother because he wanted her to have something he made. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen. About the chicken thighs and the block of cheese that had come out of the cart at the register. About a November parking lot and handcuffs and a 12-year-old boy who had understood enough. He thought about $4, 33s. He thought about $340. He thought about the distance between them and what that distance measured. Not the moral distance, not the legal distance, but the specific human distance between a system that forced people into impossible positions and the people it forced. "Miss Brooks," he said. "Yes," she said, the composure fully back in place. Whatever had moved across her face was contained again. Filed in the same place, she filed everything that couldn't be addressed right now, because right now required something else. "The $170 you still need," he said. She looked at him. "Is Noah's next payment," she said. "Due Friday." He nodded. He opened his desk drawer. He took out the company checkbook. Not his personal checkbook, the company's, because this was not a personal matter, and he was not going to pretend it was. He wrote the check for $170 and put it on the desk between them. She looked at it. She did not pick it up immediately. "This isn't the conversation," she said. "Is it?" "No," he said. "This is the beginning of it." She picked up the check. She looked at it for a moment. at the amount, at his signature, at the specific real fact of a piece of paper that closed the gap between 1,030 and wet $200. She put it in her jacket pocket. Not the way someone pockets charity. The way someone pockets something they intend to account for, carefully, with full awareness of what it is and what it costs and what it means about what comes next. He had seen that motion before too. Different pocket, different year, same understanding. Tell me about Noah, he said. She looked at him, not with surprise, with the specific, assessing attention of someone deciding whether the question was real. She decided it was, she told him. Noah Brooks had been born on a Thursday in April, 7 years ago, in a Baltimore hospital that Camille had driven herself to because the person who was supposed to drive her had decided 3 weeks earlier that fatherhood was not the version of his life he was choosing. She had parked the car in the hospital garage. She had taken her bag. She had walked to the maternity ward and checked herself in, and 7 hours later had held a 7-pound, 4-ounce boy who looked at her with the specific, unfocused intensity of someone who had just arrived somewhere and was taking stock. She had said, "Hi, I'm your mom. We're going to be fine." She had meant it as a promise. She had spent 7 years keeping it. Noah was. She paused here, not from difficulty, but from the specific, pleasurable problem of trying to accurately describe someone you knew completely and loved without reservation. She tried anyway. He was curious in the way that required active management. Not destructive, investigative. He had, at age 5, taken apart the kitchen faucet to understand how it worked and had mostly put it back together, and the part he hadn't put back together had been the subject of a YouTube tutorial at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday that Camille had watched 3 times before successfully completing the repair. He was funny in the dry, observational way of children, who spent a lot of time with adults and had absorbed their time. He had told her last month, when she had burned the rice for the 2nd consecutive night, that maybe the rice was not the problem. He drew constantly, not casually, with the specific, focused intensity of someone who understood that drawing was a way of understanding things. He drew buildings and machines and faces, and the imaginary creatures he invented, and named with the same seriousness he applied to everything, because Noah did not have an ironic relationship with his own interests. He had, 6 weeks before the diagnosis, drawn a portrait of Camille, not from a photograph, from memory, from the specific version of her face that he carried, which was different from the version she saw in mirrors. In his version, her eyes were larger. Her expression was, she had looked at it for a long time trying to find the word, steady. He had drawn her steady. She had put it on the refrigerator. It was still there. Marcus listened. Not the way executives listened in meetings, filtering for the actionable, extracting the relevant, moving the conversation toward its conclusion. He listened the way he had listened to his grandmother in the kitchen on Mosher Street. The way he had listened when someone was telling him something that required him to be fully present or the thing being told would be lost. He was fully present. "The diagnosis," he said. "How did you find out?" "A routine checkup," she said. Noah had been tired, more tired than usual. The specific, persistent tiredness that was different from the tiredness of a 7-year-old who had played hard and needed sleep. She had noticed it for 3 weeks before she made the appointment. Had told herself it was the change of season, the new school year, the particular adjustment of a child moving from 1st to 2nd grade. She had made the appointment because she was his mother, and she had learned, in 7 years, to trust the specific quiet alarm that sounded when something was wrong with him. Not loud, just present, the way a smoke detector sounds before the smoke is visible. The pediatrician had ordered blood work. The blood work had come back the next day. She had been at her desk when the call came, had taken it in the stairwell because the stairwell was the only private space in the building she could reach in the 30 seconds before she understood that she needed to be somewhere without an audience. She had stood in the stairwell for 11 minutes after the call. Then she had washed her face in the bathroom, gone back to her desk, and answered the phones for the rest of the afternoon. Because the phones needed answering, and Noah needed her functional, and falling apart in the stairwell was something she could not afford to do for more than 11 minutes. Marcus looked at the Vomte on her wrist. "The 90%, yes," she said. You hold on to that. Every day, she said. I write it at the top of every page of notes I take. So when the rest of the page gets hard, I can see it. He was quiet for a moment. My mother died of cancer, he said. 1976. I was 9. Camille looked at him, not with the performed sympathy that the sentence sometimes produced, with the specific, direct attention of someone receiving information that recontextualized what had come before. Treatment? She said. Limited, he said. Different era, different access. He paused. She was gone 7 months after the diagnosis. I'm sorry, she said. The 90%, he said. When my mother was diagnosed, there was no number like that. Not for what she had, not in 1976, not for someone in her circumstances. He looked at Camille steadily. Hold on to it. It's real. She looked at him. At the man across the desk, the $1 billion portfolio, the 14th floor, the office with the view of Baltimore that included, if you knew where to look, the direction of West Baltimore 4 miles west. She had worked for this company for 3 years and had known his name and his title and the broad outline of what he had built and had not known this. Nobody knew this. You understand why I did it, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said, and he looked at the monitor, at the frozen footage. At 47 seconds that contained a decision, and not the 19 days that had produced it. The system put you in an impossible position, he said. You found the only exit available. I understand that completely. He paused. I also can't pretend it didn't happen. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to, she said. I know, he said. What happens now, she said. He looked at his desk, at the checkbook, at the monitor, at the drawer where his grandmother's photograph lived. Not displayed, kept, in the specific way of things too private for a surface, but too important for a box. He thought about 19 days of phone calls and hold times, and the specific, grinding exhaustion of navigating a system that was technically designed to help and practically designed to be navigated by people who had time and resources that Camille Brooks did not have. He thought about $2,500 deductibles and 6 to 8 week review periods, and the gap between a policy that looked adequate on paper and a policy that was adequate in the moment when someone's 7-year-old needed treatment to start on schedule. I need to look at something, he said. The footage, she said. The insurance policy, he said. She looked at him. Our policy, he said. The one you have through this company. The one with the $2,500 deductible. He paused. I redesigned it in 2019. I thought I had made it better. I need to understand why better wasn't enough. Camille was quiet for a moment. It's better than what I had before, she said. At my previous job, the deductible was $4,000. That's not the standard I'm measuring against, he said. What standard are you measuring against? She said. He looked at the vomte on her wrist, blue and yellow beads. Made by a 7-year-old who wanted his mother to have something he made. Worn every day by a woman who had taken $340 from a petty cash box because the system that was supposed to protect her son had a $2,500 deductible and a 6 to 8 week review period and no hardship exceptions. Whether it works, he said, for the person who needs it, in the moment they need it. He paused. It didn't work for you. I need to understand why and whether it's not working for others. Camille looked at him, the assessing look. Then she reached into her bag. She produced a folder. Not thick, 3 pages, printed, with handwritten notes in the margins. She put it on the desk in front of him. I've been keeping track, she said, since Noah's diagnosis. Every call, every hold time, every option I pursued and what it produced. She paused. I don't know why I kept it. I think I needed to document that I had tried everything. That this wasn't. She stopped. That you hadn't chosen this first, he said. Yes, she said. He picked up the folder. He read it. Every call, every hold time, every door that had been technically open and practically closed. 19 days of a woman trying to find an exit that didn't exist and documenting each dead end with the specific, organized precision of someone who needed the record to exist, even if no one was ever going to read it. Someone was reading it. He turned to the last page. The final entry was from this morning, 8:47 a.m., Financial Assistance Office. Hold time, 52 minutes. Status processing. Estimated review, 6 to 8 weeks. She had been on hold for 52 minutes this morning. Then she had come to work. Then she had answered the phones. Then she had come upstairs when his assistant called. He closed the folder. He looked at her. "Can I keep this?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I made a copy." Of course she had. Marcus Webb had redesigned the company health insurance policy in 2019. He remembered the meeting. October, a Tuesday, his HR director Janet Osei presenting three options from the carrier. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Premiums, deductibles, copay structures, out-of-pocket maximums. A spreadsheet with color coding. Green for company cost, blue for employee cost, red for the gap between what the plan covered and what a significant medical event would actually require. He had looked at the red. He had chosen Plan B, the middle option, the one that reduced the deductible from $4,000 to $2,500 and increased the company's premium contribution from 70% to 80%. He had done this specifically because of the red, because he had looked at Plan A's $4,000 deductible and thought about his mother and said, "We can do better." They had done better. He had believed that. He was sitting at his desk at 4:15 p.m. with Camille's folder open in front of him and the insurance policy document open on his laptop, and was understanding, with the specific, uncomfortable clarity of someone reading something they had something without fully reading, that better and adequate were not the same thing. He had known this in theory. He was knowing it now in the specific way of someone whose theory had just acquired a face. He read the policy from the beginning, not the summary, the document itself. The language that appeared after the summary, in the smaller print that contained the actual terms, the actual exclusions, the actual mechanisms by which the plan worked, and the ways in which it didn't. The deductible, $2,500 individual, $5,000 family, reset annually on January 1st, not prorated for mid-year enrollment, not reduced for catastrophic diagnosis, not subject to hardship exception. He wrote that down, no hardship exception. The prior authorization requirements. Certain medications required pre-authorization before coverage applied. The pre-authorization process. 5-10 business days standard, 72 hours expedited for urgent cases. The definition of urgent, immediate threat to life or limb. A 7-year-old's leukemia treatment starting on schedule was not by the policy's definition urgent. He wrote that down. Urgent, immediate threat to life. Treatment timeline not covered. The financial assistance coordination. The policy included a reference to external financial assistance programs as a resource for members experiencing hardship. The reference was in Section 8, subsection 4, in language that described the programs as available rather than as something the company would actively connect members to. He wrote that down. Financial assistance, mentioned, not connected. He opened the carrier's website, found the financial assistance programs referenced in Section 8. Read the eligibility requirements. Household income below 250% of federal poverty level. Application process. Paper form. Supporting documentation. 6-8 weeks review. He wrote 6-8 weeks. He sat back. He looked at what he had written. 4 items. 4 places where the policy that he had believed was better had been for Camille Brooks and Noah, and the specific urgent reality of a leukemia diagnosis in October not enough. Not because the policy was cruel, not because it had been designed to fail, because it had been designed by people who were optimizing for the aggregate, the average employee, the average medical event, the average timeline, and the average had not accounted for Camille Brooks. The average never accounted for the specific person. He picked up the phone and called Janet. She answered immediately, the specific alertness of someone who had been waiting for a call without knowing they were waiting. The health insurance policy, he said. I need to understand it. A pause. Which aspect? The deductible structure, he said. Specifically, what happens when an employee has a catastrophic diagnosis mid-year and hasn't met their deductible? A longer pause. They're responsible for the deductible before coverage activates. Is there a hardship exception? Not in our current plan, she said. We looked at plans that included hardship provisions in 2019. The premium differential was significant. How significant? Approximately $340 per employee per year, she said. He stopped writing. 340, he said. On average, she said. It varied by plan tier. He looked at the folder on his desk. $340. The exact amount Camille had taken. Not because she had calculated it against the premium differential. She couldn't have known. But the number sat there on his desk like something that had been arranged. The specific, improbable precision of a coincidence that wasn't a coincidence, but was the universe being unusually literal about a point it needed him to understand. The hardship provision that would have protected Camille Brooks cost $340 per employee per year. She had taken $340. The cost of the gap was exactly the size of the gap. Janet, he said. Yes. How many of our employees have had significant medical events this year? A pause. I'd have to pull the data. Pull it, he said. I want to know how many employees have had events that required them to meet a substantial portion of their deductible, and I want to know whether any of them have accessed the financial assistance programs listed in Section 8. The financial assistance programs are external, Janet said. We don't track utilization. We don't track them, he said. He thought about Section 8, subsection 4, the programs described as available rather than connected. The paper form and the supporting documentation and the 6-8 week review. We're going to start tracking them, he said, and we're going to start connecting people to them proactively. When a claim comes through that suggests a significant deductible exposure, someone from HR calls the employee, not sends them a link. Calls. That's a staffing question, Janet said. I know, he said. Figure out what it costs. He paused. And the hardship provision. The $340 per employee. I want a revised plan proposal on my desk by Friday that includes it. Silence. Marcus, Janet said carefully. The budget cycle for benefits is... I know when the budget cycle is, he said. I want the proposal by Friday. We'll find the budget. She was quiet for a moment. Is this about a specific employee? She said. He looked at the folder. At 19 days of phone calls and hold times, at 8:47 a.m. this morning. 52 minutes on hold. Status processing. Estimated review 6 to 8 weeks. At the VOMT, he had watched Catch the Light when Camille sat across from his desk and told him about Noah without performing anything. It's about all of them, he said. The specific employee helped me understand that. He hung up. He looked at the laptop, the policy document still open. He scrolled back to the beginning, to the summary page, to the language that appeared at the top of every plan document, the language that described what the plan was designed to do. This plan is designed to provide comprehensive health coverage for you and your eligible dependents, protecting you from the financial impact of significant medical events. He read it twice. Then he opened a new document. He typed one line. Does this plan do what it says it does? Below it, he typed, for Camille Brooks, no. Below that, how many others? He saved the document. He picked up Camille's folder. He read it again, not for the information. He had the information. For the specific human texture of it, the hold times written in precise numerals. The names of the representatives she had spoken to. The notes on what each one had said, recorded with the same care she applied to everything. The care of someone who needed the record to exist, because the record was the only proof that she had tried. She had tried everything. The system had tried nothing. He closed the folder. He looked at the window. Baltimore outside, the city at 4:30 in the afternoon, the specific golden quality of October light on buildings that had been there long enough to deserve it. 4 miles west, West Baltimore, Mosher Street, a kitchen where a woman had made abundance from what she had, because abundance was not a quantity, it was a practice. He had learned that in her kitchen. He had built a company on it. He had not built the company's health insurance policy on it. He was going to fix that. Starting with the proposal on his desk by Friday, ending with something that actually did what it said it did. He called Camille at 6:47 p.m. She answered on the second ring. The sound of dinner being made in the background, the specific ambient noise of a kitchen in the early evening, something on the stove, a child's voice asking a question she answered, with the automatic, half-present attention of a parent managing two things simultaneously. Miss Brooks, he said. Mr. Webb, she said. The kitchen sounds continued. She did not move away from them. I've been reading your folder, he said. I thought you might be, she said. I want to ask you something, he said. Not about the policy, about the system, the full system, the insurance, the financial assistance, the hospital billing. Everything you navigated in 19 days. He paused. I want to understand it the way you understand it. From inside it. A pause. Not hesitation. The specific, assessing pause of someone deciding whether this was the kind of question that deserved the real answer or the managed one? Why, she said. Because I designed part of the system you were inside of, he said. And I designed it without understanding what it looks like from where you were standing. The kitchen sounds continued. Noah's voice again, asking about something. The specific, urgent curiosity of a 7-year-old who needed an answer immediately. 1 second, Camille said, not to Marcus, to Noah. Then back to the phone. Can I call you back in an hour? He needs dinner and homework, and I need to be present for that. Of course, he said. She called back at 8:12. The apartment quiet now. Noah in bed. The specific different quality of silence that followed a child going to sleep, fuller than ordinary silence, still containing the warmth of the day's activity. He's asleep, she said. How is he? Marcus said. Good tonight, she said. He had energy. He wanted to draw after dinner. A pause. Good nights are. I've learned not to hold on too tight to the good nights. But I also can't not be grateful for them. No, Marcus said. You can't. A moment of quiet between them, the specific mutual quiet of two people who understood something about the specific gravity of a child's illness and did not need to perform understanding for each other. The system, he said. The system, she said. She told him. Not from the folder, she had the folder, but she didn't need it. She knew it in the body. The way you knew things that had cost you 19 days of hold times and dead ends and the specific grinding exhaustion of trying to navigate something that was technically a series of connected services and practically a series of disconnected obstacles. The insurance company first. She described the deductible structure not as a policy feature, as an experience. The specific moment at the pharmacy when she had understood that 80% coverage meant she was paying $200 before she was paying anything. The way the pharmacist had looked at her when the total came up, and she had stood at the counter and done the math in real time and understood what the math meant. She described the prior authorization process, the 5 to 10 business days, the definition of urgent, the specific conversation with the insurance representative who had explained, with genuine kindness and no authority to change anything, that Noah's treatment starting on schedule did not meet the clinical definition of urgent. He has leukemia, she said. He's 7. The oncologist said delays affect outcomes. That's not urgent by their definition. No, Marcus said. It's not. I asked what urgent meant, she said. They said immediate threat to life or limb. I asked if leukemia was a threat to life. They said yes. I asked why that didn't make it urgent. They said because it wasn't immediate. She paused. Immediate meant today. Noah's threat was scheduled. It was coming. The urgency was in the schedule, not in the moment. Marcus wrote, urgent today. Schedule urgency not covered. She described the financial assistance office, the 47-minute hold time, the application, the 6 to 8 week review, the specific, infuriating accuracy of a system that acknowledged hardship existed and had created a process for addressing it that required more time than the hardship could wait. The people who need financial assistance the fastest, she said, are the ones who can least afford to wait 6 to 8 weeks. The people who can wait 6 to 8 weeks are the ones who probably don't need it as urgently. She paused. I don't know who designed that timeline. I don't think they were thinking about Noah. Marcus wrote, timeline designed for the system, not for the person. She described the hospital billing department, 3 separate departments, oncology billing, pharmacy billing, facility billing, each with their own processes, their own hold times, their own representatives who were helpful individually and collectively produced a system that required her to navigate 3 separate conversations about the same underlying problem. I asked one of them if there was a single person I could talk to about all 3. She said. She said no. She said I would need to contact each department separately. A pause. I wrote down all 3 numbers. I put them in the folder. I have called each of them multiple times. I saw, he said. The folder, she said. I kept it because I needed to know I had tried everything. That when I made the decision I made, it wasn't because I hadn't tried. She paused. It was because I had tried everything and this was what remained. I know, he said. Do you? She said. Not confrontationally, with the specific direct honesty she applied to everything. Because the people who design these systems, the deductibles, the timelines, the prior authorization definitions, they know the system exists. They don't know what it's like to be inside it at 8 p.m. After a 47-minute hold time, and a pharmacist looking at you, and a number that doesn't work, Marcus looked at his notepad. 8 items. 8 places where the system had produced an outcome that the system's designers had not intended, or had intended, and had not examined closely enough to understand the human cost of. What would you change? He said, specifically. If you could change one thing about the system. She was quiet for a moment, not considering whether to answer, loading the answer that was already there. The deductible reset, she said, January 1st, every year, regardless of what happened in December. She paused. Noah was diagnosed in October. I had 2.5 months left in the plan year. If he had been diagnosed in January, I would have had the full year to meet the deductible gradually. October means I had 2 months, same deductible, a fraction of the time. She paused. A prorated deductible, scaled to the month of diagnosis for catastrophic events, would have cut my gap in half. Marcus wrote it down. The prior authorization timeline, she said. 5 to 10 business days for urgent cases defined as immediate threat. A separate track for cases where treatment delay affects outcomes. Oncology, pediatric cases specifically. 24 to 48 hours. She paused. The oncologist submits the documentation. The insurance company has 48 hours. The medication gets authorized before the child's treatment is delayed. He wrote it down. The financial assistance application, she said. Online, not paper. Real-time income verification instead of documentation submission. Provisional approval within 72 hours for cases with documented diagnosis. Final approval within 2 weeks. She paused. You don't need 6 to 8 weeks to determine that a single mother with a 7-year-old with leukemia needs financial assistance. You need the diagnosis document and a pay stub. He wrote it down. And the coordination, she said, 1 person, 1 intake. Hospital, insurance, financial assistance, 1 person who knows all 3 systems and helps the patient navigate all 3 simultaneously instead of requiring the patient to navigate 3 separate systems while also being the parent of a sick child. He looked at what he had written. 4 specific policy changes, described with the precision of someone who had lived inside the problem for 19 days and had arrived, through necessity, at solutions more practical and more human than anything the system's designers had produced. Camille, he said. Yes, she said. How long have you been thinking about these? Since day 3, she said. When I understood that the system wasn't going to move fast enough, I started thinking about what would have to be true for it to move fast enough. She paused. I didn't have anyone to tell, so I kept it in my head. Tell me now, he said. I just did, she said. I mean formally, he said. I want you to write it down. The way you wrote the folder, every change, every specific mechanism, every timeline. I want to take it to the carrier and to the HR team, and I want to use it to redesign the policy. Silence. You're asking me to help redesign the company health insurance policy, she said. I'm asking you to document what you already know, he said. You did the research. You lived the process. You identified the failure points with more precision than my HR team has in 3 years of managing the policy. He paused. That knowledge has value. It should be used. And the $340? She said. He was quiet for a moment. You took what the policy should have covered and didn't, he said. I'm not going to pretend that's not what happened, but I'm also not going to pretend that the conversation ends there. He paused. What you took will be reconciled. What you know is worth more than $300. She was quiet for a long time. He let the quiet be what it was. Noah has a goodnight drawing he made tonight, she said finally. Not a non sequitur, a way of arriving at the answer through what mattered most. He draws something every night. Tonight it was a house with a yard. She paused. He's never had a yard. We live in an apartment. But he draws houses with yards because that's what he thinks a house looks like. Another pause. I want him to have a yard someday, not because of what it is, because of what it means that we got somewhere, that the getting here was worth it. Marcus said nothing. I'll write it down, she said. Everything. Thank you, he said. Mr. Webb, she said. Marcus, she said. The camera. The footage. She paused. You watched it 3 times. Yes, he said. The 3rd time, she said. What did you actually see? He thought about it. Not the motion. He had told her about the motion. The thing underneath the motion. The thing the camera had captured without knowing it was capturing it. Someone who had tried everything else first. he said. The line was quiet. Yes, she said. That's what it was. She said goodnight. He sat at his desk for a long time after she hung up, the notepad in front of him. 8 items, 4 policy changes, a prorated deductible, and a 48-hour prior authorization track, and a 72-hour provisional assistance approval, and one person who knew all 3 systems. None of it complicated. All of it obvious, once you had been inside the problem. He looked at the drawer where his grandmother's photograph lived. He opened it. He looked at her for a moment. Cecilia Webb, 1987, the year of the parking lot and the handcuffs and the $4. 33, and the 12-year-old boy who had understood enough. He had built a company since then. He had not built it far enough. He closed the drawer. He picked up the notepad. He got to work. The proposal went to the board on a Thursday, not the following Thursday, the same week. Marcus had told Janet Friday. Janet had delivered the proposal Tuesday. Marcus had read it Tuesday night, revised it Wednesday morning, and called the board chair Wednesday afternoon to add it to Thursday's agenda. The board chair, Robert Yuan, 64, the specific, careful patience of a man who had been in finance for 35 years and had learned that urgency from a CEO usually meant either an opportunity or a problem, and that the two were often the same thing, had asked what it was. A benefits revision, Marcus said. Benefits revisions go through the annual cycle, Robert said. This one doesn't, Marcus said. A pause. How significant? Significant enough that I'm not waiting for the annual cycle, Marcus said. Robert had put it on the agenda. The board met at 9 a.m. in the 14th floor conference room. 12 members. The specific, assembled weight of people who had built and funded and governed things and who understood, from long experience, that when a CEO called an off-cycle benefits revision urgent, the conversation was going to be about something more than benefits. Marcus presented the proposal without preamble. Not because he was avoiding context, because the numbers were the context, and the numbers were better at making the case than he was. Current policy deductible, $2,500. Average medical event for an employee with a catastrophic diagnosis, $18,400 in year 1 costs. Average deductible exposure relative to annual salary for employees in the bottom salary quartile, 4%. He let that number sit. 4% of annual salary. Before treatment. Before the 20% copays that began after the deductible was met. Before the medication costs and the specialist visits, and the specific accumulating financial weight of a significant diagnosis. For reference, he said, the comparable number for employees in the top salary quartile is 2%. He looked at the board. Same deductible, he said, 7 times the proportional impact. Robert Yuan looked at the numbers. The proposal, he said. Marcus walked them through it. 4 changes. Prorated deductible for catastrophic diagnoses, scaled to month of diagnosis, reducing the exposure for employees diagnosed late in the plan year. Prior authorization fast track for oncology and pediatric cases. 48 hours, not 5 to 10 business days. Financial assistance provisional approval, 72 hours for documented catastrophic cases, not 6 to 8 weeks. And a benefits navigator. 1 person, internal, whose job was to help employees coordinate between insurance, hospital billing, and financial assistance simultaneously. The cost, said Diana Marsh, the board's finance lead. 51 sharp, the specific focused attention of someone who processed numbers the way other people processed language. $847,000 annually, Marcus said. Fully loaded, including the navigator position and the premium differential for the enhanced plan. Against revenue of $2, $1 billion, Diana said. 0.4%, Marcus said. I calculated it. Diana looked at the proposal. You calculated it before I asked. Yes, he said. She looked at him steadily. Why now? The policy was last reviewed in 2019. What changed between 2019 and this Thursday? The room was quiet. Marcus looked at the board. 12 people. Combined experience in finance and governance, and the building of significant things that ran to several centuries if you added it up. People who understood systems, how they were built, how they were maintained, how they produced outcomes that were sometimes different from the outcomes they were designed to produce. He thought about Camille's folder. About 19 days documented in precise handwriting by a woman who had needed the record to exist. About $340. About 33, about the specific 47-second distance between what a camera could capture and what it couldn't. An employee brought something to my attention, he said. A gap between what our policy says it does and what it does for the person who needs it in the moment they need it. He paused. I should have found the gap myself. I didn't. She did. An employee identified a policy gap, Diana said. An employee lived a policy gap, he said. There's a difference. The room was quiet again. Robert Ewan looked at the proposal. The navigator position, he said. Internal. You're not proposing to outsource it. No, Marcus said. An outsourced navigator works for the service. An internal navigator works for the employee. That distinction matters when the interests of the service and the interests of the employee are not aligned, which they frequently aren't, Robert said. Which they frequently aren't, Marcus confirmed. The first objection came from Thomas Park, no relation to David Park in the Philadelphia Planning Department, just a man who had been on the board for 6 years and who raised the same objection in every meeting where a cost was proposed. The precedent. If we enhance benefits in response to a specific employee situation, Thomas said, we create an expectation that individual situations drive policy. That's not a governance model. That's case-by-case management. The policy change is not in response to one employee, Marcus said. It's in response to a gap that one employee made visible. The gap exists for every employee who has a catastrophic diagnosis late in the plan year. The data supports it. He looked at Thomas. The individual situation is how I found the gap. The gap is why I'm proposing the change. Thomas was quiet. The second objection came from Susan Lee, newest board member, private equity background, the specific focused skepticism of someone who had been trained to find the risk in every proposal. The 48-hour prior authorization track, she said. For oncology and pediatric cases, what prevents abuse? Employees seeking to designate non-urgent cases as urgent to access the fast track. The clinical documentation requirement, Marcus said. Oncologist or pediatric specialist submits the authorization request with diagnosis codes and treatment timeline. The carrier reviews clinical documentation, not employee designation. He paused. The fast track is triggered by clinical evidence, not by patient request. The carrier has agreed to this? Susan said. They will, Marcus said. Susan looked at him. You haven't negotiated it yet. I have a meeting with them Friday, he said. The proposal gives them two options. Agree to the fast track as a planned feature, or we go to market for a carrier who will. He paused. We have 340 employees. We are not a small account. Susan looked at the proposal. You've already decided, she said. Yes, he said. Then why are you presenting it to the board? He looked at her. Because governance requires it, he said, and because I want this on the record. I want it in the minutes that this board voted on a benefits change that cost $847,000 annually, 0.04% of revenue, to close a gap that was causing employees with catastrophic diagnoses to choose between their treatment timeline and their financial survival. He looked at the room. I want that on the record because I want to look at the record in 5 years and know we made this decision when we understood what the gap was. The room was very still. Robert Yun looked at the proposal. Then he looked at Marcus. You said an employee brought this to your attention, he said. How? Marcus thought about 47 seconds of footage, about watching it 3 times, about the third time and what the third time had shown him, not the motion itself, but what the motion contained. The 19 days compressed into a gesture that the camera had captured without knowing what it was capturing. She documented her experience, he said. Every call, every hold time, every door that was technically open and practically closed. He paused. She kept a record because she needed to know she had tried everything. The record made it possible for me to understand what trying everything looked like. Robert was quiet for a moment. The vote, he said, 9 in favor. 2 abstentions. Thomas Park voted no. The precedent concern noted for the record. Susan Lee abstained. The carrier negotiation, not yet complete. 9-1 to 2. Marcus noted Thomas's no without surprise and without resentment. Thomas was not wrong that individual situations should not drive policy. He was wrong that this was that. But the distinction was genuinely subtle, and Thomas had voted his genuine concern, which was more than could be said, for every no Marcus had received in 20 years of board meetings. He called Janet after the meeting. 9-1, he said. Thomas? she said. Thomas, he said. Start the implementation. Navigator position, posted by end of week. Carrier meeting Friday. I want the revised plan documents to employees by December 1st. That's 6 weeks, Janet said. I know, he said. It's also 2 months before the plan year resets. Every employee who has a significant claim in November and December gets the new deductible structure retroactively for this plan year. Silence. Retroactively, Janet said. Retroactively, he confirmed. If the gap existed before the vote, it exists before the vote. We're not closing it from Thursday forward. We're closing it from where it should have been closed. Janet was quiet for a moment. Marcus, she said, the employee who brought this to you. Is everything okay? He looked at his desk, at the folder, at the notepad with 8 items and 4 policy changes, at the drawer where his grandmother's photograph lived. She will be, he said. He hung up. He opened the drawer. He took out the photograph. He looked at Cecilia Webb. The specific contained dignity of a woman who had fed a family on what was available and had been handcuffed in a parking lot for $4.33 and had come home the same night and made dinner and had not talked about it because not talking about it was what was needed. She had deserved better than that. He had spent 44 years understanding that. He had spent the last 6 days doing something about it. Not enough, not close to enough, but something. He put the photograph on his desk, not in the drawer, on the desk where he could see it, where it had always belonged. Noah's second treatment cycle started on a Monday. He brought his drawing notebook to the hospital, not because Camille told him to, because he had decided the hospital needed more drawings, and he was the person to provide them. She sat in the waiting room and opened her phone. An email from Janet Ossie, the revised plan documents. Effective December 1st, prorated deductible, 48-hour prior authorization, 72-hour financial assistance approval, benefits navigator starting Monday. She read it once, put the phone in her bag, looked at the Vomte on her wrist, blue and yellow, still there. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't feeling it, because some things arrived too large for immediate response and needed to be held before they could be properly felt. She held it. When Noah came out, he had drawn a portrait of his oncologist with an extremely large stethoscope and presented it with the seriousness of an artist giving a gift. She said it was the best drawing she'd ever received. He told Camille in the car. Did she? I think she says that to everyone, he said, but I think she also meant it. Camille looked at him in the rearview mirror. Still him, entirely himself. She drove. On the Monday the revised plan went into effect. Marcus walked past the reception desk at 8:47 a.m. Camille looked up. He stopped. How's Noah? Good week, she said. 37 drawings. He nodded, kept walking. She watched him go. Then she turned back to her desk, picked up the phone, said good morning to whoever was on the other end, did her job. In the supply room down the hall, the petty cash box sat on the second shelf. She hadn't been back in there since. She didn't need to. Subscribe if you're new. Share this with someone who's been inside a system that wasn't built for them. And tell me in the comments, what did you do when the only door left was the wrong one? I read everyone. See you in the next story.